Clair Obscure Expedition 33 is coming to every major platform on April 24th, 2025. And if that's all that you care to know, then fair enough, you can click away now. But if you care at all about this project, and if you hadn't before, you should now, then I highly encourage you to watch on because we have learned a lot today. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
We are Expedition 33.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and if you enjoy what I do, including very spectacular looking upcoming JRPG style games like Clair Obscure Expedition 33, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So, of course, what is Clair Obscure Expedition 33? Well, it is something that we've talked about a couple of times here on the channel. It is the debut title of Sandfall Interactive, a French development studio that is heavily inspired by the JRPGs of old. Think your classic Final Fantasies, Legend of Dragoon, things like that. Hell, Super Mario RPG, something we'll talk about in a second. Some really classic high-quality stuff that doesn't really get referenced very often in big-budget titles like this in the current year. I've had my eye on this one ever since it was first revealed, talking about the initial reveal trailer, the combat overview trailer, etc., and today we had the fortune to see it at the most recent Xbox Dev Direct, and boy oh boy did they hit us with a lot of information here. So we're going to go through the general facts, story information, gameplay mechanical information, some things like, the full-blown world map that they've included, something we'll talk about a little bit further down the line, and a whole bunch else. So I hope that you're ready to be strapped in because, boy, we have 1,500 words of script to discuss here, and I think it's going to be a good time. Clair Obscure Expedition 33 started out as a solo project, although of course that quickly grew because there ain't no way that a solo dev was going to make a game like this. It has been in development for 4 years, and as mentioned, it has been very heavily inspired by the JRPGs of old, but specifically using modern design and tech to make it kind of live up to the current standard of game dev while still having that feeling of an old school style game. It features a reactive turn-based system akin to Legend of Dragoon and Super Mario RPG, and does include a lot of things that older fans of the genre like myself will be familiar with, while also having traversal, full voice acting, very high-fidelity graphics, etc., that a younger, more modern crowd would probably expect. As far as the story is concerned, the game is set in an alt-history France, where 67 years prior to the setting of the game, a mysterious, almost eldritch figure known as the Paintress appeared on an island far off the coast alongside a towering monolith, upon which every year she paints a new number, counting down over time. And each time she paints said number, everyone who is of that age or somehow older, but based on the way the system would work, it would basically be everyone of that age, fritters away to dust like they just got Thanos snapped. And of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, the world is not too happy about this and not doing too well either, with huge swaths of the population getting erased every year. As such, every year a new expedition named after the current year's number is assembled from volunteers, conscripts, we're not really super clear on that yet, and set off on an expedition by boat to the Paintress's island to try and kill her, to make this whole erasing huge swaths of the population from existence thing stop. As I'm sure you can imagine, the majority of our party is drawn from members of this expedition, Expedition 33, but something that is interesting is we can actually see now from current gameplay footage that there are more and more expedition members who go on the mission than we have in our party. However, with the fact that, we don't see them in the party, along with some dialogue we've seen in previous trailers, it's clear that not many actually survive entering what is actually a whole world created by the Paintress. It's been stated that there's a major focus on a more dark, mature story with adult characters, something that is not always the case with JRPGs, although I think also happens more often than people give it credit for, but of course, the stereotype is the teenage party saves the world by fighting God, So we're moving very clearly away from that, with the intent to make the cast feel like quote-unquote real people with adult issues. As such, we've seen that there are protocols and procedures that these expeditioners have been trained for to kind of handle whatever it is that they can wind up encountering in the Paintress's realm, but combined with the facts that, Clearly, you can't plan for everything that's going to happen in an Eldritch Realm, and also none of the other expeditions have ever returned. Those protocols may not be the most salient in action. We also get a reference to a Lumiere who apparently watches over the expeditions. This is given to us in a speech by a great political figure as they're about to go out on their journey. It's not really clear if this is a founder, a hero figure, or maybe some sort of religious icon, but obviously we will find out over time. Now, the real meat of things begins as we start discussing some of the new characters and a whole new NPC race that seems like they're going to have a major impact on the story. There's a wide range of personalities and motivations in the party. Characters like Gustav and Luna are fairly straight-laced. They're focused on the mission, finding success, making sure that no one else dies at the Paintress's hand, whereas others like Ciel have dealt with a lot and suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of the world that has been created by the influence of this eldritch being, and largely, while calm and collected and helpful, also wants revenge for what happened, which of course can be a very different motivator that can have some major impacts on how a character behaves. Then we have Mael, who is the youngest of the group and is explicitly stated as not just wanting to survive, but wanting to live her life. A mindset that, as a young person growing up in a world where the era of old age is getting closer and closer to your own age, is certainly something that could be impactful for your psyche. But what's interesting is it seems like she also has the strongest connection to the Paintress's world and its inhabitants, something we've seen multiple times now over the course of these trailers, and something that I expect is going to have a big role to play in how the story unfolds. Most excitingly, however, we also learn of a new character, Monoko, who is obviously not human and is described as a, quote, friendly but bloodthirsty philosopher, which is one hell of a descriptor for a character. He's a playable party member and a Gestrel, which is, again, a race of beings that will have a lot of NPC presence and are seemingly unique to the world of the Paintress. Not clear if this is a race that was created by her specifically, or are part of maybe the world that she came from and came here with her. Who really knows? But they apparently see battle as a form of meditation, so very much warrior, philosopher, battle monk style characters. He's also, very interestingly, this game's blue mage, for those of you who know Final Fantasy, or if you prefer an even deeper cut, a morpher from Tactics Advance, as he is able to take parts from enemies that you defeat and specifically transform into them to use their physicality, whatever magical skills, weapons, and other abilities they might have against your foes for you, which is very, very interesting. I'm very excited to see exactly how that's going to play out. Monoko is apparently quite old and has encountered many different expeditions, so on top of being a very capable combatant, I imagine he's going to have the ability to provide you a lot of insight into the history of the game's world, what's happened to other expeditions, and perhaps even what is exactly going on with the Paintress herself, which is very, very interesting. Finally, we've been introduced to Eske, a friendly giant who's apparently one of the oldest and most powerful beings in the game's lore. Now, what's interesting is he's not a party member. He's actually our mount and airship, because yes, the game has a fully explorable world map, and by bringing him a specific upgrade item, special stones, he'll get different abilities that allow you to better traverse said world map. And man, like, the devs were super proud of this in this presentation, and I can totally see why, because I'm just as excited about it. Like, we have a JRPG style game releasing in 2025 with a fully explorable and fleshed out world map. That is not something that I was expecting to hear from any presentation anytime soon, and I would bet that you were not expecting to hear it either. Now, when it comes to traversing the world, it seems like you will be able to walk around as whatever party member you'd like, or perhaps different characters will take over depending on what part of the world you're in. We'll have to see. And we've seen multiple shots of characters in different outfits, both in and out of combat as well. So you'll either have different skins that you can equip characters in just for the sake of fashion, or you may very well potentially have different equipable armor or armor sets that will give you different unique stats, which I would love. It's always such a shame in modern RPGs and JRPGs where you have armor that you can equip and accessories that you can equip, but it doesn't show up on your character. Or even worse, you just don't have armor and accessories that you can equip, and you just like boost your stats. It's so boring. given all the different ways that we're able to customize characters with gear in the olden days. So, seeing that it's something that is potentially going to be at play here, and of course, given the French's propensity for high fashion, I can't say I'm too surprised that this mechanic seems to exist. Speaking of mechanics, we have a lot of other gameplay and mechanic systems to cover, so this is probably going to be the meat of the video, so let's get into that here. I have covered some of the character skills for the party in past videos, such as those used by Gustav and Mael. You can check that out here and in the description, but we get some more insight into the rest of the party now, which is very nice. For example, CL uses a sun and moon tarot style system, allowing her to foretell events to empower her skills or get more AP to use other skills. And notably, she can also use these charges to enter an empowered quote-unquote twilight state that seems like it gives her a big damage boost, although we haven't had the chance to see too much about this mechanic just yet. Of course, as we mentioned, Monoko is able to transform into various different beasts and enemies that you've defeated to use their skills, but he also has a unique bestial wheel mechanic as part of that kit, where every use of a skill moves the needle on the board in kind of a roulette system. Now, whatever type of skill the needle lands on will be empowered until you use another skill to move the needle again, so it seems like this is going to be a pretty interesting, fun, wild gameplay style to match that sort of bloodthirsty philosopher personality that he has. Of course, I imagine this will play quite well with the reactive turn-based system that Expedition 33 uses, where you're able to not only play tactically, but also in a reactive sense, having reaction time to dodge or parry different attacks, or have good timing on the attack to get bonus damage, crits, things like that, to maximize your own damage and avoid enemy attacks. Of course, this is a point that I've expressed concern over in my previous Clair Obscure videos. The idea that you can avoid all damage with proper reaction timing sounds like a recipe for a very easy game as soon as a player figures out proper timings and just kind of how the game flows. However, there was a section in this presentation where the devs stated that the game was previously far too hard, that there are actually some enemies that the senior dev team is still kind of traumatized by, and they've scaled that back, rebalanced things, and they feel they found a balance of these different types of systems that will work for the widest range of players. I, of course, still have my concerns. Without getting our hands on it, we don't know how accurate or how well this is really going to play, but we'll have to wait and see. It seems like the team at least has an idea in mind that they're working towards, which makes me feel like they're probably doing something pretty alright here. Speaking of that tactical decision making, Expedition 33 also looks like it is massively customizable when it comes to building your party. There's honestly too much for me to get into here. I'm actually going to do a whole separate video to deep dive into all these skills, stats, mechanics, etc. But as a brief overview here, every character has their own stats, like vitality, might, agility, defense, and luck, which will of course govern all of the various different stats that you would expect if you've played any game similar to this in the past. And you do also have the ability to reset your build using an item called a recoat. That seems like it's going to have other uses as well, so a little bit of a cost to go into a respec, so pay attention to what you're doing. Every character also has their own unique mechanical ability, as well as a unique ability tree with literally dozens of abilities and potentially hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating here, hundreds of talents, passive skills, or quote-unquote luminas, as the game calls them. Looks like there's going to be a highly granular sort of formula going on with each of these luminas. For example, we have one here called Draining Cleanse, that its whole purpose for existing is to use a single AP to block a status effect that's targeting the character. And that is one of over 39, allow me to repeat that for emphasis, 39 lumina that are just on screen in this screenshot, with a list that has to be at least 3 times that size. Really, this reminds me a lot of the equipable skills from Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together on the PSP, although blown up to an even more massive scale. And it could be a very good or very annoying feature depending on how arduous it is to acquire and equip these Lumina, and how much of a tolerance you have for really doing a lot of menuing and a lot of character customization in terms of very specific abilities. I'm personally very curious to see exactly how this shakes out, and I imagine it's going to be one of the things that could really make or break the game for players. But based on their description of difficulty and player customization, it seems like the team at Sandfall has kind of accommodated for that, and there's probably some sort of auto-equip recommended skill thing that you can do to smooth out that process if you don't feel like getting into the nitty-gritty. Notably, and it's a very like short mention, so we don't have a lot of insight into how this is going to function, but it is mentioned that you can get skills and abilities from gear as well, which of course would allow you for even more options when it comes to character customization. And based on, Unicorn Overlord, that very lightly mentioned a similar type of mechanic, and then that wound up being one of the biggest character building aspects of that game, this could be a very deep system on top of everything else that these characters already have available to them. We've also seen that each ability, of course, has different AP costs and effects, meaning that you can build a character numerous different ways to complement your playstyle according to what different abilities they might have. For example, one dev, Michelle Nora, and apologies if I mispronounced that, mentioned he builds Mael as a support character, while the rest of the studio tends to build her as a high DPS glass cannon type character, which is obviously quite the difference. So I'm curious to see how each other character has different potential skill paths and builds that you can go into over the course of a run. Finally, as far as gameplay and mechanics are concerned, we got a quick shot of what appears to be a team up or unite attack, with Luna throwing Gustav into the air with magic so he can initiate a big attack. Now, of course, given some of the wacky stuff that some party members like Monoko can do, I imagine that there'll be some very fun actions to take with a combo system like this, and as a longtime fan of games like the Suikoden series, there's so much cool stuff that you can do with combo or unite style attacks, so very excited to see more about this system. Now, of course, I did mention the world map, so we should discuss this more because it is a relatively small part of the presentation, all things considered, but it is an absolutely massive reveal for the game. Again, Clair Obscur has a fully traversable world map, and it is one of the features that the team seems to be the most proud of. SKA, the big cuddly giant, will be your mount/airship on the map, and you'll be able to upgrade him to get different access to secret paths, hidden side quests, whole new areas potentially, and apparently some of the hardest bosses in the game. We've seen that he is able to run, swim, and fly, which I imagine will be some of the abilities that you unlock for him over time with those special stones. And it seems like there's definitely an emphasis on exploration and spending time in the world map to find different hidden aspects of the world. I always think of things like Final Fantasy 7 and 8, where you really had to do a lot of digging to find some different hidden paths or crazy bosses like the weapons in Final Fantasy 7, right? So having something like that here in Clair Obscur will be super cool if they really have leaned into it as hard as they're implying. Personally, I think that it looks like a beautiful map with the sort of scale that you would expect from a world map in like an old school JRPG, but while still maintaining its visual style and fidelity in a modern design sense, which I can only imagine was incredibly hard to pull off. Finally, as a quick note about the world map, we can see down here in the corner, you have the ability to return to a camp that I would imagine will function as like a hub zone where you can do upgrades, buy and sell gear, talk to characters, form relationships, yada, yada, yada. But we haven't seen any of what that actually looks like yet, so we can really only speculate. Definitely looking forward to learning more about that feature as well. We've also finally had the chance to see a little bit more into the overall design of this game's world, beyond just like, battle map type of ruined areas where there's weird, freaky, sort of painter-style enemies and eldritch creatures running around. Like, there's an actual world here, which is not something that I was actually expecting. For example, we have the Gestural Village, where you can go and buy and sell gear, potentially have skirmishes with the Gestural and learn about their culture, kind of hang out, relax. It's a safe zone that also has weird little hidden traps and puzzles to ward off any enemies that try to wander in. So it seems like the Paintress's world is much bigger in scope than we were initially led to believe by all the initial trailers. And what's cool is that every zone in the game, including the Gestural Village, seems to have a very specific color palette and design to evoke certain feelings from area to area. There's clearly an artistic focus here, so you would imagine that the actual art design would be really good, and it looks it from what we've seen thus far. All told, this was an absolutely massive reveal for a ton of new information for Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and I am 100% more invested than I already was, which is saying something because I think this is one of the coolest reveals of 2024, and now, knowing that it's only a couple months away at time of recording in 2025 is super exciting. Of course, as the first project of a new dev team working on such an ambitiously scoped game, there's a lot of potential for failure, but there's also a lot of potential for success, especially with all of the passion that they have behind the project. There's some stuff that I have concerns about, like how easy the game is going to be with all of the dodging and parrying. There's definitely still some frame rate issues in the trailer that we've seen that when you have a game that is such high fidelity and has such a focus on beautiful designs, could be very disengaging from the overall experience, but as long as those are things that they're able to get hammered out by the time the game releases in a couple of months, then everything should be good. More than anything, though, I'm curious about what you think about Expedition 33. I know it's not the type of game that we normally cover here on the channel, but it is one that I am extremely interested in, and I imagine a lot of folks in my audience are as well. So let me know in the comments if it is something that you're planning to pick up, if you are excited about it, if this is the first time you've heard of it, what your first impressions are of it, or if you've been following it as closely as I have been, what about some of these more granular details that we've learned today are you the most interested in? I will definitely be covering anything else that comes out about the game as we lead up to the release, and we'll be covering it post-release as well if there is any interest in me doing so. So let me know by liking the video, sharing it with friends, and overall giving it a little bit of interaction so we can appease Lord Algo. With all that said, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now.